Joyce Griggs, Congressional District 1. Good morning. You just was you were in the race here May 24, 2022, and you are in a runoff.
Yes.
Tell us what this district is.
Okay, it's Georgia Congressional District 1. And it has 15 counties, all the way from starting with Chatham County, Savannah, which is the largest. Then we go down to Bryan County, Richmond Hill, all through there. Then we're in Liberty County, Hinesville, Long County, Little Wesley. Then we go on down to Wayne County, which is Jessup, Georgia. And then, of course, we go down to Pierce County, okay, Blackshear, those areas. Then we go on down to Waycross, okay, which is Ware County. We also have Brantley County, Hoboken, those places, Nahana. Then we have, oh gosh, it's there's a prison there, Charlton County, okay. We also have Brunswick, which is Glenn County. So we have 15 counties in this district. From one to the other. We all go all the way down to the Florida-Georgia border. All the way. So it's a pretty big county.
Big district, yes. You are
big district.
And you've run, this is not your first time. We've seen you here on the broadcast, but everybody, June 21st, this coming Tuesday is the runoff here in Georgia for those candidates that made it as the top two here in Georgia. If you don't get 50% plus one, then you have to have a runoff with the top two contenders. And Joyce is one of those persons. She's the name for you to know. Get out to the polls on this coming Tuesday. But Joyce, tell us who you are. Go ahead and dive into your story.
Okay, just a little bit about me, okay? I grew up one of 10 children, middle. So, you got to fight for your place when you're in the middle. Those above you and those beneath you. But in any event, I had my mom and dad, neither one of them had a formal education. And my mom worked as a domestic servant sometimes. We worked out in the fields. My dad was a laborer. And there were 10 of us. And we couldn't afford very much. And, we're talking about health care now, but we didn't have health care. Guess what our health care was? My mama praying, laying hands on us, and putting together some homemade concoction. Okay, that worked back then, So, but anyway, we didn't have there's a lot of things we didn't have. We were poor. And I say poor, there was abject poverty, dirt poor. I mean, really. And we're talking about housing. Yeah, we had a house to live in, but it was so ragged that during the winter, you had to put a bucket down to catch the water because it was freeze on the floor, okay? I mean, it was just really ragged. But one thing we had that a lot of people don't even have now in the family, and that was love. My mama was a praying woman, and she kept us together. And she taught us some good things. She instilled some good stuff in us, okay, about respecting each other, loving your neighbor. And she used biblical principles. And so that was ingrained in me as I grew up, to treat people with respect, And because she used to always say, well, God made us all. You got to treat people right. So I learned a lot from my mom. But in any event, one day, working out in those fields, I told my mom, that was some hard work, okay? Picking cotton, picking cucumbers, picking tobacco, put in tobacco, as they would call it. And I looked at them and I said, Mama, I'm going off to college and I'm getting an education. I'm not coming back to this. Not that I thought I was so much better, but inside, I knew at an early age, God had put something in me to do something to help me, to help my fellow brother and sister, irregardless of their race or their color or whatever. So, of course, I saved my money. I worked at George Washington University Hospital the summer after I graduated from high school in the kitchen, okay, delivering food trays to the patient. And I lived with one of my sisters, and she said, you don't have to give me anything. Just save your money for school. And that's what I did. That was and I'll never forget that, and I'm always grateful for what my sister did. But we helped each other. So I went to North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina, HBCU. We were called the Eagle. See, I soar like an eagle, okay? And the eagle rises above the storms. There's a lot of shots taken against the eagle, but the eagle keep on rising and keep on flying above the storm. In any event, I got a bachelor's in sociology and a master's in counseling from North Carolina Central. Also have a JD, a law degree, okay? I'm not practicing right now, but I practice at some point. So I have a wealth of knowledge and experience in so many different areas. And I can see things from a world view, from a local view, strategic and tactical levels. So I'm well equipped to be in Congress. I know how to read, write, and interpret policies.
And
fight for the benefit and the good of the people.
Yeah. So tell us about our platform, your platform, Joyce.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for asking. It includes a number of issues, but of course, my website is Joyce Griggs 2022, and you can read more in detail about the issues that I'm concerned about. And especially now, there's so many issues. Let's face it, healthcare is still a big issue. Okay, thank God for the Affordable Care Act that President Obama was instrumental in getting through when he did, but we still have a lot of issues, a lot of crises in healthcare. And a lot of people may not know this, but Georgia ranked among the lowest, even compared to third world countries, about the mortality rate in childbirth, the number of the maternal mortality rate, the number of women dying giving birth. And of course, child mortality is high also, but it was highest among Black women. Okay, and that's sad. Rural hospitals are closing. People have to travel for miles if they can get there when they can. And let's face it now, extra burden is the price of gasoline. Okay, our economy is on everybody's mind. Just what, yesterday, I think the Feds decided to raise the interest rate. I think they said it was going to be the highest it's been, well, as far as the rate increase in 20-something years. So there's a lot of issues that's facing people. There's homelessness. A big issue of mine also is housing, affordable housing. Right here in Savannah, and I see it throughout the district. People are being put out of houses. They can't even afford. There's no affordable housing, is what I'm saying. And it's very sad. So homelessness is a big issue. Veterans issue, because I'm a veteran myself. I've seen how veterans are treated, especially when they go to the VA. A lot of times, it still takes some time to get an appointment. And even at that, sometimes the care is substandard. I thank God for it. But we got a lot of work to do with the Veterans Administration. Also, the claim process, how they process claims for disability. Oh my God, it's such a long process. Some people wait 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes longer. Sometimes they die before their claims are adjudicated. And that's one thing I want to work on. I want to have a task force set up in my office that will monitor the disability claims coming throughout the first district, coordinate with the VA, Veterans Administration, because we cannot afford to have this backlog like we have now. We must increase the quality of care for the veterans also. Let's face it, they're the ones that served this country, that protected this country. So we must take care of those that have taken care of us. Now, voting rights is a big issue. I think it's a travesty that we're in 2022 and we still have these issues with voting. Oh my God. Voter suppression, and all these laws that are being instituted throughout the country. Look at Georgia about voting rights. This is sad. And and the suppression and the suppression and the problems with voting is not just about Republican issue, but there's a Democrat issue also, both sides. Okay. So the people are being impacted. They're being disenfranchised. Even in this last election, there's been a lot of problems. There were problems with the machines. They weren't even counting the votes. So I say we need to make sure that we have fair elections, throughout the country, throughout the state. Now, a couple of other issues that I'm concerned about is the fact that that education, boy, that's a big issue. I know some are trying to push the voucher, and unfortunately, it appears that the poor children, the left behind community, disenfranchised, will be left out because the voucher system is almost like having private schools, and so people don't have to pay for it. But why should the taxpayers pay for someone if they want to send their child to a private school? They shouldn't. So I'm not for the vouchers. Okay, but I am for all children getting a good and quality education. If you look and go through some of these schools in the poor neighborhoods in this district, it's disgusting. They don't have all the supplies and equipment they need. At one point, and maybe still going on, some of the teachers were actually spending money out of their pockets to buy supplies and equipment for their children. And another big thing, the teachers must be paid what they're worth. And that is sad. For someone to be entrusted with such a tremendous responsibility, we got to take care of our teachers. Okay, we must increase their wages. Some of these other professions make, oh gosh, so much more money than the teachers. And the teachers are tasked with a critical responsibility. So I said, let's take care of the teachers. And since we're on education, let's talk about these student loans. I personally know my daughter got some big student loans, okay? And really, thank God I was fortunate that I graduated without student loans because I worked 2 jobs. I got the grant. I got a little bit of student loans, but I paid them off early. And the interest rate on these student loans is ridiculous. And it's a money-making scheme all over again. And that's the problem. A lot of these things that are happening are money-making schemes at the expense of the working class people, at the expense of the poor people. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poor, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Education is critical. Education. And also, used to, they would have certain trades that you could take in high school. And when you got out, you could walk into a trade. We need to bring those trades back. We need to look at apprenticeship. We need to partner with some of these larger companies because everybody don't want to go to college. We got to realize that, okay? So we've got to look at all things. We must also look at the fact technology is taking over a lot of jobs. Robots, people may not realize it, but robots are in a lot of places. So there's so many issues. Our national security is a big issue, okay? Not just from outside the country, but from within, okay? We have these groups that want to overthrow our government. That impacts our national security. A lot of issues, even the COVID crisis, all these issues are affecting our national security. Climate change, okay? Someone, I think it was a general talking, he said, climate change is a national security issue. And a lot of people want to deny global warming, climate change. It is real. I'm concerned about that, okay? The Environmental Protection Agency has been gutted and gutted and gutted. And now we must strengthen to protect our environment. If we don't, we're going to destroy ourselves, just like the Voting Rights Act was gutted and gutted and gutted. So there's so many issues that are impacting us right now. And I think the people are saying, what do we do? I've heard people say, I don't know about medication. But when I go in the grocery store, I'm walking out with one bag and I've spent $50 and I don't have anything in it. Okay? So food prices, my God, that's ridiculous. How high is it? I know with the supply chain, it has impacted a lot of things. Okay? But bottom line, we've got to learn to be independent of some of these other countries. Certain things we used to do. We used to have factories that people had jobs for. We outsourced those. They went overseas. Okay? We used to grow our own food. Okay? They were paying farmers at some point not to grow crops. Now look at where we are. Let's look at the present issues that's staring us in the face. Baby formula. Oh my God, I never thought I'd see this. Baby formula. And I just read where we brought in, I think it was another country, Sweden or Switzerland, somewhere. We brought in all this baby formula. And then the laboratory, the Abbott lab up in Michigan, flooded just recently. Okay. So of course that is going to further create the backlog of baby formula. And for the women out there, I was reading where they're saying there is and there will be a shortage of feminine personal items. Okay. So it's like, boy, it's like shortage after shortage, issue after issue. And I know a lot of people have blamed this president for some of these issues, and he may be responsible for some of them. But let's face it, we've had a lot of issues that are beyond our control. Let's face it, COVID, the average person, we couldn't control that, okay? And there's still a lot of issues going on with COVID. People are still getting sick. People are dying. And that's why I said we've got to have affordable and adequate health care. Open up the Affordable Care Act. Let people get their treatment. And you know what's sad, especially in some of these rural areas, some of them are so sick they don't go to the doctor until they're forced to, until they always have to be hospitalized. And that shouldn't be. I know telehealth has come in. At one time, if people think about it, they didn't want telehealth, And then all of a sudden, that's a big thing, So it's interesting how things change from day to day. Now, also, there's been a lot of talk about reparations, okay? And before I jump to reparations, Juneteenth, they signed that into law last year, right? And I knew they were going to commercialize it, okay? They were, and that's what they're doing. And then, but people don't want to talk about reparations. But I asked the question: would you want to work 400 years and no paycheck. I don't think so. Our ancestors built this country. And matter of fact, we've been marginalized, we've been criminalized, you name it, it's been done against us. And so I'm for reparations. I am. How do we do it? I don't know, but I'm sure we can come up with a good program where we can make sure it's done. I was reading just recently out of California. I forgot what city it was in, but they decided to start reparations again. And there were oceanfront property out there where they had taken from Black families years ago. Okay, so things like that are happening perhaps on a local scale in different places. And let's face it, it appeared that when we started to rise, there was obstacles that tried to bring us down. Like, look at how they burned down, look at Black Wall Street, look at Tulsa. You know, Blacks were wealthy, we were doing our own thing. Then all of a sudden, even with the government help, they destroyed us. Okay, and some people say, get over it. Get over what happened in the past. We can't get over it because it impacts us now. And I say a lot of us, people of color, are suffering from PTSD. That's post-traumatic slave disorder, because we've gone through so much as a people, but still we're standing and still we're rising. We're making significant contributions to this country and around the world. So there's so many issues, like I said before, but I'm for health care for the people. We've got to do something. Affordable houses, homelessness. My God, I never thought I would see the degree of homelessness in America. This is America. It's sad. It really is. And I know I talk, but I'm open.
No, thank you, Joyce. I wanted to make sure that people knew that you were on that ballot this coming Tuesday.
Yes.
This coming Tuesday, the 21st of June. She's in the runoff, everybody. 1st Congressional District 1, anybody in that southeast corner of Georgia, spread the word, get out and vote.
Yes.
June 21st.
First, that's right. And early voting is still going on this week. It started Monday and it will go through Friday. And but Tuesday they need to get out there. Also, I would like the listening audience to know that I received, my crew and I, we, the people, received 49% of the votes. Okay. But now they're saying, there's a runoff. And according to Georgia law, you got to have 50% and 1 vote. Okay. So we're going to do it. Also, the closest one to me, he only received 38% of the votes, but he would not concede. And we're talking about, well, we need to get ready for the general in November. But when we have to constantly work now, it's less time to get ready for the general. But we'll prevail. I'm convinced of that, and we've got the strength, the tenacity. We got boots on the ground. People are working. People are concerned, and I really don't like to use this like a lot of times they say, well, the first Black, and that's think about it. That's kind of sad when we've been here this long, and it's the first Black to be in position, this, that, the other. Really it is, and we've never had a woman. Nor have we ever had a Black person in this seat. Yeah, kind of sad.
Well, June 21st is coming Tuesday. Y'all get out. Joyce Griggs, Congressional District 1. Thank you, Joyce, for joining me on this broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Hey, I'm fired up and I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I'm a G.I. Joyce to the polls. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Y'all know what time it is. It is the 3rd Saturday of the month, and it is Juneteenth. Mr. Reggie Jackson, good morning, sir.
Morning, Tamara.
How are you?
I love Juneteenth for two reasons. First of all, it's Juneteenth and it's my daughter's birthday too. So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah,
And it's Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day, Mr. Reggie.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Y'all gonna have a big fun this weekend.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great weekend. So
yeah, this Juneteenth, I could tell you, prior to the reparations movement and Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday, I knew very little, if anything, about Juneteenth, Mr. Reggie.
mm. I don't think that that's a surprise to me because I know a lot of people that really didn't know much, or some people that had never really even heard of Juneteenth. So it's one of those things that I think got more high profile last year, and now people are digging into it, trying to learn more about it. But we've been celebrating it continuously in Milwaukee since 1972.
Wow.
We're one of the longest running stretches of, having a big celebration for Juneteenth. One of the longest, if not the longest in the country.
Look, why, how is it that Milwaukee was able to, be such a pivotal place with Juneteenth? And we're looking at now, like, I want to talk about too, how they're commercializing it. Like, that part I don't like.
Yeah.
Cause it's like a slap in the face.
Yeah, it is. This is what America does. Any opportunity to make some money, somebody's going to take advantage of it. But the reason Milwaukee has been celebrating it, somebody from Milwaukee was down in Texas back in 1972 and was like, "What is this? What y'all doing? What's the big deal?" And they discovered Juneteenth. They like, "How come I ain't never heard of this before?" Like, I need to tell these people back in Milwaukee what they missing out on. And they came back and they talked with some community folks, and they had the first celebration, and they continued to grow. And within a few years, it was like massive in Milwaukee. It's not nearly as big as it used to be. The city kind of restricted the area that Juneteenth used to be celebrated in. I mean, it used to be like really, really like this long stretch right on Martin Luther King Drive, like really far. And then it just kept getting smaller and smaller. But over the last few years, it's extended a little bit further. It's gotten bigger. And they have a Juneteenth parade that I was in last year, which is just, man, it was beautiful to see all of the families out. So it's a big deal here.
Oh, well, I'm excited. Atlanta has a big Juneteenth festival here. Oh, maybe I'll be able to get him on the broadcast. But Atlanta has a big Juneteenth fest here in Centennial Park. 10 years in the making that they've been doing this, but it's big this year. They got like stages.
Wow.
So Atlanta's doing it big. So if you're here in the metro Atlanta area, y'all get down to Centennial Park. It's going to be a major celebration. I'm excited because this will be the first time I've kind of gotten into it, and I'm going to kind of I'm gonna go down and participate and just feel the energy, because to me it's bigger than it's like, again, how they want to commercialize it. I saw some company had an ice cream. Like, they can keep their damn ice cream.
Yeah, I heard about that. Like, really? Ice cream for Juneteenth? Like, I don't think those Black people in Galveston, Texas was eating no ice cream back in 1865. So y'all tripping.
Yeah, they tripping. They this is bigger than that. This is more important than some damn ice cream.
Right? Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So you want to tell us more about what we don't know about Juneteenth? Again, I just, our people, we don't know our history. And that's why these third Saturdays are so important. Just being able to bring to light some of the stuff that we just don't know.
Yeah. It's a very interesting history to Juneteenth. And I think there's a lot of, really even to this day, a lot of misinformation about Juneteenth as well. So I've studied it, I've written about it, I've talked about it on numerous occasions, and I just want to just kind of share with everybody the significance of it. So the day that we're celebrating that we call Juneteenth is a celebration of June 19th, 1865, when a group of enslaved Black people on Galveston Island in Texas were read the Emancipation Proclamation. and found out that they had been offered freedom by Abraham Lincoln, literally 900 days before they had the Emancipation Proclamation read to them. So, people think that, oh yeah, everybody found out about the Emancipation Proclamation, right? No, they kept it a huge secret there.
It's not like they had the internet, right?
Right. But there were people there who knew. The white people there knew about it, right? I mean, it wasn't like it was a secret to them, but they made sure that it didn't get to the black people that were enslaved there, because they knew that around the country, when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, even though the Confederates said, well, he's not our president anymore, so he can't tell us what to do. He can't free anybody. Black people was like, yeah, we leaving. We
Deuces.
see ya. And so they wanted to make sure that wasn't going to happen on Galveston Island. So when those Union troops came, this is a couple months after the war even ended. And they told the people there, it was like this huge celebration. And in order to kind of keep that emotional energy alive, they said, we're going to use this date, to celebrate every year. And so it became a really big deal there in southern Texas. And eventually it spread to some other places around the country. And literally, like the years leading up to like 1900, it was like a huge celebration in the Black community. It was like, it was like your birthday, your wedding anniversary, Christmas, Easter, all of that rolled into one. It was a huge celebration. And it was a way of not just celebrating, what people consider celebrating freedom. It was more than that. It was celebrating the victory that we had been looking for, fighting for freedom. It's more so than Abraham Lincoln didn't free anybody, right? The Emancipation Proclamation, I always tell people, you need to read the Emancipation Proclamation instead of reading about it, because the big myth is that the Emancipation Proclamation freed all of the slaves, supposedly, right? That's what we've all been taught in school. But if you read the Emancipation Proclamation, and most people have never read it, what you'll find is that Abraham Lincoln issued it for a very specific reason. So we have to actually back up. So September of 1862, he issued what he called the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. And he issued it in September because he was waiting for a Union victory, because he knew that at that time the Confederates were doing really well in the war and the Union wasn't doing well. They were getting their butts kicked for the most part. So he was waiting for a big victory in the battle in Antietam, which was a victory, but it was one of the bloodiest battles in the war. He used that to say, okay, now is the time for me to tell these southern states what I plan to do in issuing this Emancipation Proclamation, giving them forewarning that on January 1st, I will issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So that's exactly what happened. January 1st, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And this is what is hidden in it that nobody knows because they don't read it. He did not free, with the Emancipation Proclamation, those Black people who were enslaved in those 4 states that never joined the Confederacy that were still slaving states. So Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland were exempted from the Emancipation Proclamation. The state of Tennessee was exempted from the Emancipation Proclamation. Parts of Virginia and parts of Louisiana were all exempt. And the reason Tennessee was because the Union Army had kind of control over Tennessee, and parts of Louisiana and Virginia they had control over. So he was saying, I am freeing the people who were enslaved in those states that are in rebellion. So he considered Tennessee to not be in rebellion anymore because the Union troops were pretty much in control of that state. So literally, I did the math. And what that means is that 1 out of every 5 Black people that was enslaved in the country was not mentioned as being freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And people ask, well, why is that? Well, listen, you had those 4 border states, as they called them, Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland, who were not going to just give up the practice of slavery because that's how they made their money, right? And they didn't want to lose that free labor force. And they basically told Abraham Lincoln, if you want us to free those people that we're enslaving, you got to pay us reparations. What? They asked for reparations to end slavery? Who would have thought that that's literally what they did? They were like, Mr. President, give us some money and we'll free them. And of course, Lincoln was like, dude, we're fighting a war. I don't have no money to pay y'all for that. So just, keep on doing what y'all doing. And literally, the war ends. Lincoln is assassinated. Those Black folks in Galveston, Texas, hear about the Emancipation Proclamation for the first time. But those Black people who were enslaved in those 4 border states, and plus Virginia and Louisiana and Tennessee that I mentioned, they did not actually gain their freedom officially until December 6, 1865, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified by enough states. So when you hear people say that Lincoln freed all the slaves, tell them like, hey, hold up. That's not really accurate. Read the Emancipation Proclamation. But the most important part of the Emancipation Proclamation, outside of that, is a part that nobody ever talks about. And that was Lincoln giving permission for Black men to join the Union Army and fight for the country. Mm-hmm. And that turned the tide of the war, Tamara. 187,000 Black men joined the Union Army and Navy and turned the tide of the war. And there were a lot of Black people who didn't, particularly women, who weren't able to join the army, like Harriet Tubman, who worked as spies for the Union Army and really helped to turn the tide of the war. Had it not been for those Black men dedicating themselves to their own freedom by fighting in the Union Army, the South would have won the war. They were literally so afraid in the South when those Black troops were allowed to join the Union Army that they started having conversations about letting Black people join the Confederate Army. And they had these conversations and they were ready to do it. And people were like, wait, man, this don't make no sense. We telling the world that these are not really even human beings, that they're inferior, that they're dumb, that they're all this other stuff. And y'all want to give them guns? They're like, no, that doesn't make sense. And then some of the people were like, man, if we give them guns, who's to say they're not going to turn the guns on us? And there were Black people in the South who were enslaved who felt that the war was like wrong, like the Confederacy was on the right side, because people don't understand this today, Tamara, that there was much more allegiance to the state that you belong to than it was to the country. Right? Remember, America was still a very young country at the time. Mm-hmm. So people like, man, I love Mississippi. They may be enslaving me, but I still love Mississippi. That's how mixed up in the head some people were, because this is what they have been told their entire lives. So eventually, the war ends. Lincoln is assassinated. Juneteenth happens, and literally 1,070 days after the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment is what officially ends slavery for those last people that were enslaved in the country. So 900 days from the Emancipation Proclamation being issued to Juneteenth Day, and then another 170 days before those last people were told that slavery is over.
Man. Oh, we just been in bondage, just like we didn't even know we were free.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the other things about it, we were told that, the date that the Civil War ended, but it didn't really end on that date. Some of those Confederate troops continued to fight. Even through June, they were still fighting. And they knew that, that they had surrendered. They didn't care. They were like, we're going to keep fighting. Maybe they'll change their mind about the surrender. We're going to keep on fighting. So the fact that these last Black people, found out about, the Emancipation Proclamation in June was part of the reason, was because those Confederates in Texas were still fighting the war. Even though the war was over, they were like, the Union troops were like, dude, the war is over. What y'all doing? They like, man, the war ain't over for us. They kept on fighting. So it's just one of those kind of quirks of history. But this is what I say about Juneteenth in terms of the celebration of it, and the way that I tell people that I would prefer they celebrate Juneteenth. I want you to celebrate Juneteenth not as a celebration of Juneteenth 2022 and going out and celebrating and doing all of this, and listening to music and all that. That's all wonderful. Even if you get some ice cream too, that's okay. I prefer you not. But if you do get the ice cream, I don't want people to celebrate Juneteenth that way. What I want people to celebrate about Juneteenth is the resiliency of Black people that led to Juneteenth. the resiliency of us to still be around, fighting, kicking, breathing, raising our kids, doing what parents do, doing what communities do for each other, sticking together through thick and thin for 246 years in this mess before finally we fought to make our freedom happen. And I tell people it's very personal for me. And so I think of Juneteenth as a celebration, not of Juneteenth 2022. I think of a celebration of who we were as a people on June 19th, 1865. I'm celebrating those people. I'm not celebrating people I'm going to see at Juneteenth, the little kids running around and the music. I'm not celebrating them. I love to be there. I love being in an atmosphere. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to see the Black community come together in something very positive and people supporting Black business, all that stuff. That's wonderful. But for me, I'm like, listen, we're supposed to be honoring the people that were celebrating this back in 1865. And we need to give honor to them that they fought through this and that they turned it into a celebration of their resiliency and their will to continue fighting. Listen, slavery only ended in America not because of abolitionists. It ended because Black people made it in, right? We fought against slavery tooth and nail for 246 years and basically made America change it. People, well, what the Civil War was about, this, that, and the other. And I tell people, like, listen, if Black people were not pushing for their freedom, there wouldn't have never been a Civil War. There would have been no need to Civil War. They would, if Black people would have been okay with slavery continuing to exist and slavery extending into other states, if we would have been okay with that, it would have happened.
So let me,
but we weren't.
So let me ask you a question. So it wasn't the good white people that said, enough of this already. We shouldn't treat these Black people this way. That wasn't the reason.
No. Listen. One of the biggest myths about Abraham Lincoln. Listen, I tell people you have to separate the Abraham Lincoln views on slavery from his views on the people that were enslaved. They were two completely separate things. You have to separate the views of the abolitionists about the end of slavery and about human rights given to those people once you've given them freedom. So let's talk about the abolitionists first. All of the famous abolitionists that we know about, that we've read about, that, you know, they were pushing it in slavery. Yeah, they hated slavery. They thought it was a horrible institution. They thought it didn't fit within the model of what the country was supposed to be about, and they fought for it. But they didn't believe in equal rights for Black people once they were given that freedom. They were not pushing for Black people to be able to be educated, to be able to vote. They didn't want any of those things to happen. They wanted Black people to not be in shackles, but they didn't want to have to compete with Black people. So the abolitionists, if you go back and read a lot of what Frederick Douglass said about the abolitionists, was like, listen, y'all some hypocrites because y'all pushing for the end of slavery, but y'all don't want us to be sitting, in the room with y'all and so he called them out on that. And, they pretty much couldn't say nothing because that's what they had written and said. Like, yeah, we believe in the end of slavery, but, oh, man, equal rights. No, we can't possibly have equal rights. So that's one thing. And then when it comes to Abraham Lincoln, there was an organization called the American Colonization Society. And it had been formed in the early 1800s by some of those abolitionists and even some people that weren't necessarily abolitionists who wanted to say, well, let's free these Africans and let's send them back to Africa. Now listen.
They were going to free us and send us back to Africa.
Yeah, so this is the crazy thing about it. First of all, the Black people that was enslaved in America at that time, most of them had been here for generations. Okay. They had never even been to Africa.
And look like you.
Right. And a lot of them look like you because, well, you have been creeping in the middle of the night and raping girls and women. So these Black people saw themselves as being more American than the white people that were here because they were building the country. They were creating the wealth that the country was famous for. They built the White House. They built the U.S. Capitol. They built all of these mines. They built so much stuff. So they were like, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me we did all this work and now y'all want to send us back to Africa, not sending us back to where our people came from, because we don't have a clue where they came from, what part of Africa they came from. You just want to send us back to Africa because we supposedly, that's where we belong. And they were like, no. Frederick Douglass talked about this. He just said, no. We deserve the right to be here as much as anybody else because we've done more for this country than y'all have because we worked for free. And so this American Colonization Society eventually, was able to be powerful enough that they sent some Africans back to Africa to form, a country. And then the British did the same thing. Sierra Leone was formed by the British. You know which country was formed by the U.S., by those freed Africans? Well, I'm gonna leave it as the quiz for your audience, Tamara, to look that up. But let me tell you about this place that they sent the Africans to from the United States, because I still consider us, we're Africans. Okay, we may have been in America, but we're still African people, in my opinion. When they sent them back, this is what happened. They didn't ask those African people, oh, we sending some boats over with some people. Y'all don't mind, do y'all? They didn't ask them anything. They just sent the boats over there.
They just dropped us off. Like, just get off the boat. Go on over there.
No, that's not what they did, though. What they did is they sent them over there and put them in charge. They put them in charge. There's a book called Mississippi in Africa, and it talks about the mindset of these Black folks that they sent over there. What they did, one of the first things they did was they instituted a government that was modeled off the US government. And they started building these big, beautiful white buildings that look just like the plantation houses in Mississippi. And the people in Africa were like, wait, hold on. Who are y'all? And what are y'all doing here? And why do we care about y'all building these ugly buildings? So it was friction right away between those two groups. And that friction still exists to this day, Tamara. It's still a lot of what you hear about the civil wars in that particular part of Africa is directly related to the fact that white folks from America and Britain sent these Black folks over and put them in charge. And they treated the Africans the way they had been treated by the white folks in America. So it was not like they went over there with open arms. Oh, we're back home. Let's reconnect. Nah, they went over there with a bad attitude, and they treated those African people horribly because white people gave them the power to do that. And we never really talk about that.
What was in it for the white people? They were trying to colonize it. They got more territory. So they got colonies in Africa. That was what it was all about, was getting those colonies and getting those products on ships so that Americans could make money. And they gave these Black people the benefit of having the power, not sharing the power, literally gave them the power over there. And it's just never been resolved. So that's part of it. Now, the other part, let's talk about Abraham Lincoln and how he felt about colonization, because he talked about this and wrote about it. He believed that Black people and white people would never get along in America. He talked to a group of Black leaders at the White House, and they came there to talk to him about some stuff. And he was like, listen, I ain't trying to listen to y'all. I came here to talk to y'all, to give y'all a lecture. And he lectured these Black men and basically said, like, listen, I know the white people will never treat y'all as equals in this country. Y'all know it. I know it. So let's just give up on this idea of y'all ever being treated as equals by white people, because it's not going to happen. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Mm-hmm. And he said, so this is what y'all should do. I've asked Congress to give me some money to buy some land, down in Panama, exploring some land in Haiti. And, I want to give y'all, freedom. And then, y'all can just get on these boats and go down to these places and, just chill. And you won't have to deal with white people no more. And they were like, wait a minute, Mr. President. And he's like, shut up, pretty much. I'm telling y'all, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to put y'all on some boats. So, y'all want this freedom. And so that's kind of how the meeting ended. And they were really very upset. These Black men, these leaders were very upset. And of course, word got out about what Lincoln said. Frederick Douglass went off. Like, how dare you talk to these men in this way? And hell no, we're not going to Panama or Haiti. We ain't never been to either one of those countries. Why would we want to go there? We built this country. Give us land here and leave us alone, basically. And so, of course, Lincoln didn't want to do that. But that was Lincoln's mindset the entire time he was president, was that he wanted to colonize these Africans. So they actually sent some to this place in Panama
a small number just to, test it out. And it was a disaster. I mean, a bunch of the people ended up dying. The conditions were horrible. And they literally had to send a boat back there to rescue them and bring them back. Because it was just an absolute ugly situation. And so, Abraham Lincoln, I tell people, he hated slavery as an institution. He thought it was dividing the country, but he didn't really care for Black people. Now, people try to say, well, if he didn't care for Black people, why did he issue the Emancipation Proclamation? Why did he free? Because he needed the soldiers, man. Don't be tricked into believing in, because one of the things that he said, finally, after he saw the bravery of these Black men fighting in the Civil War, was he's like, maybe my attitude towards these men is wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they do deserve equal rights. Maybe these men do deserve the right to vote. And he said that at a I can't remember what it was, some program he was at, where he talked about giving these men the right to vote. And guess who else was there that night? John Wilkes Booth. And he wrote that was the night he decided to kill Abraham Lincoln, because he had the audacity to say he was going to give Black men some rights that he didn't believe they deserved. So that's the primary reason he killed Abraham Lincoln. And so Abraham Lincoln went to his death still believing, and he had gotten, $500,000 from Congress to buy this land, but it ended up never working out. Because people pushed back against it. Frederick Douglass and even some white leaders are like, no, this isn't right. These people deserve better than that. They deserve to stay here. They built this country. They're Americans just like the rest of us. So I always say that when we talk about Abraham Lincoln, and I know there's a whole lot of old Black people that got pictures of Jesus and Abraham Lincoln hanging in their house somewhere. I know it. I get it. I understand. I saw it myself when I was a little boy, and I didn't understand. Until I started hearing some of the things that Abraham Lincoln said about, he believed that if in America, if there's to be a group that's superior, holding a superior position, and the inferior position, he believes that whites should hold that superior position, and that he felt that that was just the natural way things should be. So let's not celebrate Abraham Lincoln too much, but give those Black men credit for fighting in the Union Army. And I say this with a great deal of pride, Tamara, because my great-grandfather's great-grandfather was one of those Black men that served in the Union Army. He was 53 years old when he joined the Union Army. And the first job his unit had, this colored troops unit that he was in northern Mississippi, there was a camp there they call a contraband camp. And the camp was a place where those Black people that when they heard about Emancipation Proclamation, they was like, okay, pack up your stuff. Honey, get the kids' stuff together. We going to the Union lines, right? So they went, and that was how they were able to survive. They were able to get food and water and some other things and protection, right? Supposedly protection, right? So this particular camp in northern Mississippi, those white Union soldiers basically told their general, man, we ain't protecting these Black people. We don't like them. We don't care about them. We're not fighting for them. We're fighting for the Union. We're not fighting for their freedom. We're not protecting these people. And guess what? They were left unprotected. And so they sent my great-grandfather's colored troops unit to their camp to protect those Black folks in northern Mississippi. And like I tell people, I take a great deal of pride in knowing the role that my family played directly in that effort. And I think there's a lot of us, Tamara, if we were to go back and trace our family history, there are a lot of us that would discover connections to our family and men who fought in the Union Army and Navy. And that is what I tell people. If I'm celebrating Juneteenth, I'm celebrating, listen, people that's going to be coming up and Reggie, I ain't seen in a long time. What's up? Hey, man, my great-grandfather served in the Union Army in the Civil War. And he helped to make Juneteenth happen. That's what I'm going to be talking about on Juneteenth to a lot of people. A lot of people that have never heard that story going to hear that story from me on Juneteenth. And I think the other thing that's special this year is that it's a national holiday, right? It's a national holiday. It's the second national holiday that's dedicated to Black folks, right? Dr. King's birthday and now this. And the fact that I already know this, you know this as well as I do. Some people are gonna be like, man, ain't no real holiday, man. You coming to work today. Monday is the day off, a federal holiday. It's gonna be a boatload of people that's still gonna be required to go to work. I know my wife's job ain't like, oh, Juneteenth, what is that? It's a federal holiday? Oh.
Will the banks be closed on Monday?
I think the banks are going to be closed.
Okay.
Yeah. The bank.
Look, I'll take it.
You know, post office ain't going to be delivering mail, all of that stuff.
Okay. Look.
But it's going to be a whole lot of people that's, you know, that's going to be at work, just like on Martin Luther King Day, you know. But I say that, listen, let's celebrate the essence of who we were on Juneteenth, 1865, a proud people, a people that were doing the best they could in a very bad situation. And they came together and they were like, man, this is like Jubilee. Juneteenth is like Jubilee. It was like the greatest day. Imagine this, Tamara, that you're one of those people in Galveston, right? Say you're a 7-year-old girl, right? And you've been enslaved and they've been making you go out in the fields and work because it wasn't just adults. And then somebody comes and they read this thing and say that you're free. Can you imagine how happy those people were? They're like, oh my goodness. It was like overwhelming joy. Like they literally, like we celebrate Juneteenth, but their celebration was like a week long. Like, man, we partied for the rest of the week, right? So it was like huge to them. But then the reality kicked in, like, okay, what are we gonna do now? And that's the part that I think is really sad, is that they were able to celebrate it. They were able to celebrate that freedom, just like Black people around the country when the Emancipation Proclamation happened and the war ended, 13th Amendment, all that. We were able to celebrate, but there was a backlash to that ending of slavery. And the most violent time in American history for Black people, by far, was the years after the Civil War ended in 1865 through 1877, what we call Reconstruction. And we talk about how wonderful Reconstruction was, Black elected officials. Yeah, that was great. But they were killing Black people left and right around the country, in the South in particular. And the North didn't do anything to stop it. And they had taken the last of the federal troops out. Most of the federal troops were gone in less than a year after the war ended. And many of the federal troops that were left were these Black, you know, colored troops units that were still protecting Black people. But they started to murder Black people, beat, rape, kill, destroy their property. It was super duper violent. And the South continued to do that. You know, these groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the Knights of the White Camellia, these organized terrorist organizations, I call, you know, Ku Klux Klan was the first organized terrorist group in the United States. They went and they did stuff, and they were so violent, Tamara. We don't know how many people they killed. We know from the Freedmen's Bureau records that from 1867 to 1868, we know that at least 2,000 Blacks were murdered, right? But most of the other records are gone, so we don't know. But we also know very clearly that people were not trying to stop them until they got so violent that they killed some white folks as well, right? White people who were supporting Black people. So finally, Congress passed a law. The Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act is what it's known as, in 1871, and they literally outlawed the Ku Klux Klan. So you tell me, Tamara, if they outlawed the Ku Klux Klan in 1871, why are they still around today? This is the hypocrisy of laws in America. I tell people, like, man, just because it's a law don't mean it's going to be enforced. Just because it's a law doesn't mean that people are going to pay attention to it and abide by it. They literally outlawed these people because they were so violent, because they were beating and killing and raping and maiming so many people. And the other part about it, most people don't know this, is during those years of Reconstruction, so slavery ends, right? Those people of Galveston got their freedom. Well, what did they do for work? Well, some of them just packed up and left and went, you know, to other places. A lot of them went to Oklahoma, to Kansas, and started all Black towns and said, we're getting away from these white folks that's been treating us like garbage. We don't want to have nothing to do with them anymore. We're going to start our own communities. And there were like hundreds of these all Black towns, right? But the ones that stayed, and many of them didn't have a choice because they didn't have any way of getting away. They were forced to sign labor contracts because they made it against the law to not have a job. They literally made it against the law. And guess who that law was applied to? Black folk, right? And wait a minute, they call it idleness. You're idle. That's against the law. We're going to arrest you. And, you know, because the 13th Amendment says slavery and involuntary servitude are illegal except as punishment for crime you've been duly convicted of. Oh, you can still be a slave. Because this dude that got the plantation, he needs some free workers. You gotta do your time due to this crime you've committed working on that plantation for free. So it's called the convict lease system. And those that weren't involved in the convict lease system, which lasted all the way to the 1940s, by the way, 90% of the people caught up in it were black men. They literally criminalized black behavior. But the ones who weren't caught up in that system were forced to sign labor contracts. So I was able to find access to some of the labor contracts through the Freedmen's Bureau records. And so here you are, you're a 12-year-old kid, Tamara. You got to sign a labor contract. You're 12. You're 15, you're 18, you're 58, whatever your age is, and you're black, you got to sign a labor contract because you can't be idle. Now, white people can be idle all they want. Ain't nobody care. But black, no, you can't be idle. You got to be working for somebody, white. So you sign this labor contract with a white person because you ain't signing a labor contract with nobody black. And the labor contracts, in some instances, they refer to you now as a servant. Guess what the person you were working for was referred to often in these labor contracts?
What?
Master.
So we still in slavery.
Yeah.
By a whole nother name.
And there's a great book called Slavery by Another Name and a great documentary, Slavery by Another Name, which you can, check it out. And you'll learn about that convict lease system and how these black folks were caught up in that system. And they finally had to end it in the early 1940s, even though black people have been fighting against it and against it and against it. It was a devastating time to be a black person. It wasn't, all rosy and fun. In many ways, it was worse than slavery because you had been given the promise of the freedoms that everybody else had, but you weren't able to enjoy those freedoms as a black person simply because you were black. It was terrible.
My grandmother used to tell little stories, and she wouldn't talk much about it, but she would mention like the chain gang. And it was kind of like I could tell it, whatever was, I don't know whether, who was in the chain gang, but I just remember how she would say that, the chain gang. I'm like,
oh yeah.
God.
Black men, black boys that were caught up in that system. And eventually that was part of the growth of the criminal justice system. How it became big was because of the convict lease system. A great number of the people that were put in jails and prisons in the country were in the South. Even though white people were just running rampant, being criminals all over the place, they weren't locking them up the way they were locking us up. But it's one of those things where when you look back and those stories that you heard from your grandmother, the stories that probably, some of my great grandparents and others in the family probably, knew, they didn't like to talk about this stuff though.
I could hear it. Like even now, like when I say it, it's like her saying that she did not like it. It got to her in a deep, deep place.
Yeah. It was one of those things where, and I've learned this from reading some of the interviews that, the formerly enslaved people gave during the Great Depression. The federal government hired writers to go out and interview anybody that was still living that was formerly enslaved, and gathering these real accounts of what it was like. Right now, depending on who the person interviewing you was, you were either going to be very brutally honest or you were going to be like, tell the white folks what they want to hear, right? So if it was a white interviewer, then black folks was going, yes, sir, boss. They weren't going to tell the truth because they were afraid. Like, I can't trust these white people to tell them the truth. But if it was a black person interviewing you, oh man, they was going to tell the real deal, right? So when you read those accounts and you read them and you see that they're being brutally honest, you notice like, yeah, that's what it was really like. And it was horrible. It was horrible. I mean, in so many different ways. And the psychological damage of being in that space, imagine, we hear a lot about trauma nowadays, right? We hear a lot about post-traumatic, syndrome, from people who are in the war and, people who survive, like hurricanes and stuff like that, and the trauma that people have firsthand, accounts of trauma, or secondary, you hear about, a family member, a friend that drowned in, a hurricane or whatever, right? It's traumatizing. But imagine if like you being traumatized every day for your whole life, and you watching your family members, your friends, everybody being traumatized in the same way. It ain't like they got like, oh, pick up the phone and call this psychologist and get some treatment. There ain't no treatment. You just got to deal with it. Your treatment is, to keep surviving. That's how you treated this trauma and this condition that you're dealing with. But we've never had an opportunity as Black folks to actually get what we needed to help us deal with that trauma. And so it's passed on from generation to generation. There's a great book about that called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Dr. Joy DeGruy, which I think a lot of people who haven't heard of Dr. Joy, they need to pick up her book and see what she talked about in terms of how it's been passed down even till today, that mindset, not the trauma itself necessarily, but the mindset that leads to continual trauma within our community. How we, in the minds of many of us, still see ourselves in a negative light. How we can be so disconnected from the reality of how we should be connected that we don't see value in another Black person, that we have no problem pulling out a gun and shooting somebody, right? Those things are the vestiges of that trauma from slavery and never getting treatment for it. So it's a direct connection. That's why Juneteenth, okay, it was a long time ago, but it's something that we need to connect with. And particularly, I advise everybody, listen, if you haven't like traced your family's history, just do it. It can change who you are as a person. Find that oldest person in your family. This is what I did, Tamara. I called my mother and was like, Mama, can you tell me the names? And she's like, I don't know all of the old people, but I know somebody that does. Listen, I'm gonna give you Aunt Pearl's number. Isn't that a beautiful name, Aunt Pearl? So Aunt Pearl was my great grandmother's oldest sister, right? So she lived in Detroit. I was living in California. I called Aunt Pearl and told her what I was trying to do, starting to trace the family history. And she was like, okay, I know a lot of them names. I'm gonna write you a letter, Reggie, and give you the names, and you can just go ahead and use that. If you need to talk to me, just call me. She sent me the letter. I still got the letter upstairs in my house.
Oh,
still got the letter.
you probably could frame that letter.
Yeah. It
Don't
was.
keep it in a box. Put it in a frame.
I got a whole container of family history stuff that I keep it in.
Okay.
But I should frame it though. That's a great idea. I think I probably will. And so I'm looking at all of these names of people. I ain't never heard of these people before. I'm telling my mother, she's I ain't never heard. So that's how I got started. I used their names and knowing where they lived in Mississippi. And I started to go to the Mormon Genealogical Library in Los Angeles because they had all of the records, right? But they were on microfiche. There wasn't no computers and stuff back then when I started in 1991. So I'm literally on that microfiche machine going page by page looking for people. It was very tedious. And I have to be honest, I think that's part of the reason my girlfriend broke up with me out in California. She's like, you're spending too much darn time at that library.
She didn't understand.
Spending time with me. And I was, I probably was, to be perfectly honest. So, anyway, it helped me to grow because this is the most important thing that came out of that. Is not only was I able to share with my family at our family reunions, our family's history in a way that they had never known it before, but I was looking for the name of the man that enslaved my family in Mississippi. His name was Dempsey Dilts. And I wanted to find out more about who this dude was. And I put on a chat board, a genealogical chat board. I was looking for anybody who knew anything about Dempsey Dilts. And I got a response from a woman who lived in Northern California. And by this time, I had moved back to Milwaukee. And so we ended up talking on the phone. And she was like the great, 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 great granddaughter of Dempsey Dilts, this older white woman living in, like, I don't know, San Francisco area. And we talked, and she said, Reggie, thank you so much for responding. She said, I've been reaching out to the Diltses in your hometown, Charleston, for years. And I called somebody, and they're like, who is this? Click. It's just, they were hanging up on me all the time. Some of them was yelling at me, like, why are you bothering me? I was like, well, you a white woman, and you asked me. So, it shouldn't have been that big of a surprise, but I was like, no, I want to know. So she ended up sending me his whole family history, Tamara, all the way back to the good old days in Germany.
Wow.
So when he came to South Carolina and eventually, made a name for himself and bought some Black folks, and then 1840s maybe, moved to Mississippi, bought some land there, brought those Black people with him, made them walk, by the way. And that was great. I'm like, now I know. So then she sent me a map of where they were enslaved. So me and two of my cousins on one of our family reunion trips, we went down to Tillatoba, Mississippi, and we walked on the land where our family was enslaved at.
Wow.
I got soil out of the ground and put it in a bag. I got that soil in my house to this day.
Oh.
But the most incredible thing she sent outside of that, now that was like, wow, amazing, right? But she sent me a document that had the words of the last will and testament of Mary Dilts. So that was the second wife of this man, Dempsey Dilts. He died in 1862, I think, or 63, I can't remember. But his wife was left with everything, right?
Mhm.
So she writing her last will and testament, and I'm reading what she said, and she's giving away, the household goods, and she's giving away the animals, and and eventually she gets to, oh yeah, I'm giving away these 3 Black people, and she named them. Oh, to my son that's moving to Texas, and I'm giving these 2 over here to my daughter, who is getting ready to get married or whatever, and then the rest of them we can just sell, and whatever proceeds we get from the sale, we can get that money to the grandkids. And of course, when you sell them, you got to use Confederate money to sell them. We ain't gonna accept none of that Yankee dollars. And so I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this woman giving away human beings. That's like my family.
Yeah, like this is just a necklace. This is a bracelet. Like this is a chair.
Yeah.
These are people.
These are people. And so, you read about the fact that they knew they willed, people to their family, but to know it was my family and to see it on paper, I was like blown away. So it's like incredible things like that you discover. And I discovered, why I had a fascination with the military when I was a little boy. Remember them little green army men, Tamara?
Mm-hmm.
I had like hundreds of them things. I used to be out in the backyard with the tanks and the Jeeps and the artillery pieces, just setting up battles out there all by myself. Everybody's like, what's wrong with Reggie? He tripping. Why is he playing with the little army man? He in high school and he playing with the little army man.
It was your thing.
I didn't know that when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, I was crazy about the U.S. Marines, right? And me and my best friend used to sing the Marines hymn. And I knew where every Marine base in the country was. I never knew why, but when I started tracing my family's history, and I discovered that all 5 of my mother's uncles served in the military, that my great-grandfather served in World War I, that my great-grandfather's great-grandfather served in the Civil War, I was like, that's where it came from.
It's in your DNA.
It's in my DNA. And I'm sure that somewhere along the way, I heard the stories of their service when I was a little boy living in Mississippi. And that's where it came from. That's where that love for the military came from. So when people talk about, patriotism and stuff, I'm like, man, listen, don't talk about patriotism to Black people. We the biggest patriots this country has ever known. We fought in every one of y'all wars. I was about to say a bad word there. We fought in every one of y'all wars, helped y'all win all of them wars. And what have y'all given us to honor us for that, right? So don't be tripping about, patriotism. Celebrate Juneteenth as a day to celebrate those people and the joy that they brought with them, that resilience that they had, but celebrate it as a way of just acknowledging, like, listen, can't we do like beautiful things together as Black people? Look at what we're doing on Juneteenth.
Mm-hmm.
Look at how happy people are. Look at the families that are there and the people, you're going to be there and you be like, man, somebody going to be like, Tamara. You're going to be like, who is that? Girl, I ain't seen you since high school, right? That's going to happen, right? You're running to people you ain't seen in decades and stuff, right? It's just such a joyous experience for me. I love it. Last year I was there giving candy out to the kids, and it was beautiful. So I love Juneteenth.
Yeah, look, now I'm like, oh, I can't wait. So I'm gonna get out and enjoy the festivities. I'm sure, and you are too, Mr. Reggie. So everybody get out and enjoy Juneteenth weekend. Start, rediscovering who we are as a people. Dig into that family tree. Talk to the elders. Y'all, we got work to do. Thank you, Mr. Reggie. Every third Saturday, y'all, Mr. Reggie Jackson. Go to the website. Support Mr. Reggie Jackson. Thank you, sir.
All right, take care, Tamara.
When we come to Washington in this campaign, we're coming to get our shit. Them prodigies, grow, free. Reparations, and we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud. 1, 2, 1, 2, check. Cream, cash, around me, green. Look at stop me, coming for 40, and I am
Kicking the door. Clip on 40 acres and more. I'm 6.4. Miss that number, Civil War. We came from the bar. We cut to the Lord. Picking the kind of things I saw. Straight out the underground, escaping from slavery. The only cemeteries that we had were the trees. Watching our bodies while they glow in the breeze. Niggas to the north side to get free.
that way. Came from slavery. Where's on the mirror once you sit on me? Put her head on the door, but the world won't scheme. Stick to the north side to get free. Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud. 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me. Coming for our 40 acres, HR 40, and I
Look,
pay
we
for
taking them back. Putting Pettis Bridge on the map. Police came with the strap. That Sunday was bloody, no cap.
some capping.
Speaking of cap, Kaepernick taking knees at the flag. Where my justice at? We built this nation, better give me them racks. All fat, just imagine a little bit of gasoline. 4 girls got burned back in 63.
400 years, yeah, we still ain't free. I rise, we rise, take a knee.
Kaepernick.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud. 1, 2, mic check. Cream,
Cash rules everything around me.
Dream.
My legacy, you can't stop me.
coming for our 40 acres, HR 40, and I pay
We stuck in the trap with no shoes, trying to pull up bootstraps. Increasing the gap. Wealth got bigger, so we had to adapt. Discriminated cause we black. I know it worth more than I know it's a fact. They tryna feel scraps. Strike me on board so we can't come back.
30 years ago on April 19, Yusef and Try Remy Chemical Reed. If it happened to them,